Okay. Yeah. You like my misery. Okay, can I go? Depression robbed me of relationships. It robs me of happiness. It robs you of joy, of inner peace. It robs you of time with your children. It robs you from time with your wife. It's actually a big thief. From a very young age, I suffered from stomach ulcers. I suffered from migraine headaches all my life. Well, I had migraine headaches up until probably the age of 16, 17. And then from then it was just mild headaches every day, 7 days a week. And then I had other ailments. I had hepatitis B at the age of 18. I suffered from heartburn too for like the last, for 10 odd years. I suffered from depression most of my life. Lived on antidepressants for about 12 to 20 years. Went to counseling for 20 odd years.
One of the things that we have done in medicine, not only separating the psychology element from the physical one, is that we put the human being in different specialties. At the beginning, a patient came to me who has the ringing in his ear, on the left side of his ear, and he also explained to me about pain in his right knee. I can now talk about any disease because the process that makes the ring in the ear is the same that makes the pain in the knee. I had no idea back then of it. The not having an overview over the human being makes medicine very difficult.
When I transitioned into lifestyle medicine, that afforded me the opportunity to have a lot of time with my patients. And so now I could ask questions, I could understand what was going on in their life, I could get into their thoughts because, just talking and discussing and what they believed and what they thought about themselves and others and what was going on in relationships and so on. And then I began to see that there was a huge correlation between what's going on in the mind of an individual and the diseases that were developing in their bodies.
I loved my family. I didn't think it was dysfunctional. But when I look back on it now, I can see at the age of 8, I landed up in boarding school. And I think that's where a lot of my inner fears started growing. Boarding school is where you go to school and you live at school. To be stuck in a boarding school is not a nice place to be. You weren't allowed pets or anything, so I found a lizard, and that lizard became my best friend because I've always been an introvert. I'm a background person. It's really hard for me to stand in the forefront and do things. Even my little lizard that was my pet that I kept in a flat box fell out of the window because someone pushed the box that I had on him. So the little bit of security that I even had in that little lizard was taken away from me at that time in my life. And I was very homely, and home is like my sanctuary. From the age of, I can remember, the only real need besides love would have been harmony in the house. But above those two, I think my greatest need has always been freedom, the need for freedom. And when I started going into my early teens, part of being very rebellious was rebellion against the system, against all the rules and regulations, the way the schools micromanage you, where you should have the freedom and liberty to grow and, be yourself. And when you're at home and getting told how to live and what you have to do and what you don't have to do, the two of them mixed together lead to a life of suppression, where there's no freedom to express, where you're not allowed to have your say or talk back to adults, when you're only allowed to speak when spoken to, and people aren't interested in you as a child. They're not interested in what you got to say or what you got to contribute. I found really hard. I found really difficult. At the age of 15, it was so bad that on a Friday after school, I'd pack a rucksack and I would go hitchhiking around southern Africa. I just need to get out of the house, get away from any form of authority, just be out on the road by myself. So from a very young age, I've had this great desire for freedom and a great need, not even a desire, it's a need. So anything that threatens that need does challenge me and get me worked up.
Because the needs determine us in our lives. When I first came to see this process in the subconscious of my patients and realizing it, we all function the same, I was very happy to see how simple at the bottom things are.
When we look at thinking and when we look at thoughts, we recognize that there are some thoughts that we're aware of, and there are other thoughts that we're not aware of. We just look at that and we go, okay, the things that I'm conscious of, that would be the conscious mind, and things that I'm not conscious of, that would be the unconscious mind. And in the unconscious, we find what we call the heart. And the heart is where you and I evaluate gain and loss. So there we evaluate whether something is going to be of benefit or whether something is going to be a deficit.
Gain and loss includes every aspect of life. There's nothing that you cannot put either in gain or in loss. So we were so constructed that what is a gain for us, we will say yes. So we will admit in our life. What is a loss? We need to say no.
That determination of gain and loss drives our decisions.
The way in which the heart functions is fixed, is established. We cannot change it, even if we want to. We can change the way we think in our conscious, but the way we think in our subconscious or the way we evaluate things in our subconscious is fixed. Every human being in every part of the world, no matter the race or the age or the gender, they will go for the gain and they will say no to the loss. That's how we are built. We have to do it that way.
Because we grew up in a very poor home, there was always a lack of money. And as you're growing up and you're now in charge and you got your own family, you become very working from a mindset of lack. So you're always trying to save, you're trying to control spending. When you're trying to hold on to everything, you start fearing more, because then you start fearing losing everything. And the more you get, the more you're fearful of losing it. And the more you get, the more it controls you. And therein lies the problem. What you think you're controlling ends up controlling you. When you go into marriage, there's an expectation that the relationship is going to go in a certain way. And when you have children, you expect that your children are going to behave in a certain way. So as a man of the house, we were also brought up in our culture that the man is responsible for everything, even his wife. The wife doesn't belong to herself, she belongs to the man. And the children belong to the man, and the man sets the tone for the whole household. So you grow up with this false expectation, not giving them freedom to be who they are. So you land up being this tyrant in your own home. So imagine that, growing up as a little boy being the soft, gentle person, and life experiences are changing you to be this hard, brutal person. It is tiring. It is exhausting. And not only does it affect you, but you become a horrible person to those that you're supposed to love. So you're no longer a friend. You're no longer a role model. You're no longer a loving person to go to for help and for expression of understanding. You now become somebody that everybody avoids and doesn't want to be a part of. And then that alienates you, and where you think and where your need for love is, where you should be getting your love from your family, you have this expectation that your family are going to love and support you. I also felt with my children I had this responsibility to God to bring them up to serve God. But the way I was behaving was pushing them further away from God, just like the way my parents brought me up, the way they conducted themselves, the way they disciplined me, didn't draw me closer to God. It pushed me away from God.
Everybody is always about controlling everybody else. You see that in families, you see that in school, you see that in work, you see it in all sorts of situations. In fact, from little, the baby is trying to control mommy. The baby wants what the baby wants right now. There's a way of getting it, and that's crying and fussing and so on. And is the baby guilty for that? No, of course not. And the baby's just doing what the baby does. But there is that element of control, and that element of control comes naturally, and it comes from little, from birth. And why is it that we try to control others? We must try to control them so that we can somehow make them be better, so that our needs can be supplied as we need them to be supplied. The ones that we are most likely to control are the ones that are the closest to us. If there's somebody off in China and they're smoking, well, as far as I'm concerned, they're free to smoke. No control, no anything like that. Yes, I know it's harmful. Yes, I know they're destroying themselves by doing it, but they have every freedom to do so. But if it was my 8-year-old that was smoking, would they have the same freedom? Well, generally, no. No, they don't have the same freedom. Why? Because they're close. So the higher interest you have in an individual, the higher the control is. And the lower interest that you have in an individual, the lower the control is. And if you have no interest in the individual, they have complete freedom. That's how humans relate to it. How does God relate to it? Well, God sees it differently. You see, God can have maximum interest in an individual, and he can maintain maximum freedom for them as well at the same time. Because God's interest is not in the person, God's interest is for the person. So his concern is for us. He doesn't need us as his source. He is our source. And indeed, we see that. I mean, the individual in China is God's child. He loves them. He died for them. He's living for them. He intercedes on their behalf. And they're there smoking, but they have every freedom to do so. When we have his love, when we take of his love and we give it to others, now we have an interest for them rather than an interest in them. Because an interest in the other person means that I have them as my source, I need something from them. An interest for the other person means that I am interested for their sake that they be well, not for my sake that they're well. And so it's an unselfish interest rather than a selfish interest. When I am able to leave them free. That's when I'm free.
My first marriage was 21 years, and 12 of those years I went for counseling, where everything was always my issues and my responsibilities. And so I kept trying to change and fix myself. And eventually I got to the point where I actually couldn't anymore. And I said, I can't change enough for two people in a relationship. And my first marriage fell apart after 21 years. And for a long time, it was really hard. And I took it personally. Because I put so much time into counseling and trying to change, and I couldn't control her behavior. And I can understand a large part of it, why her behavior was what it was.
Well, let's say, for instance, that you decide that you are going to divorce your spouse. Well, how did you come to that decision? Well, you have evaluated lots of points of information. And typically there's a long history before that, and you're looking at all of those points, and now you've finally taken all that information, you put it together, and you say, okay, this marriage is a loss. And now, because you see it as a loss, you cannot pursue the loss, right? You are going to then go and pursue a gain. And you might evaluate the situation and say, okay, well, it's a loss, so I'm going to stop emotionally or spiritually investing in this relationship. I'll stay in it, but I'm going to stop investing in it. Or you might say, okay, it's a loss, and so we're going to separate. I'm not going to divorce, but we'll separate. Or you might look at it and you say, okay, well, it's a loss, and so I'm going to divorce. Or it's a loss, and I'm going to look for another gain.
And I think what the most fearful thing for me is the pain that I had to watch my first three boys go through during our divorce. And the suffering that they went through, that I would often pray that God would just put that pain on me. And through all of it, through the depths of my depression, even 4 years ago, my go-to prayer to God was to please take my life. That if He cannot help me, that He needs to please take my life, because I cannot live like this any longer.
When it's a clinical depression, it affects your life. You might not be able to work. You might not function in the family. You might not eat well or overeat. You might not sleep well or oversleep, and so on. There's certain symptoms associated with clinical depression.
Depression can be very debilitating because you live in a life of doom and gloom. When you wake up every morning, you wake up with a sense of dread that something's going to happen and something's going to go wrong. And you end up living a life that everything does go wrong because you're expecting everything to go wrong. And then you're trying to control that. And in trying to control that, you're becoming more stressed. Your energy levels are dropping. It's like a big black dog following you around. And that is the closest true depiction that I've ever heard of it. A constant black cloud hanging over you, and it's raining and thundering all the time. Now, I love rain, but I don't love it that much that I want a cloud over my head all the time. It debilitates you because you can't live in the moment. You can't spend happy moments with your child. I had 3 boys, and all I did was work. And when I wasn't at work, I was at home thinking about work, worrying about work, being depressed about work when things weren't going right. I went on a depression and anxiety recovery program, but that worked short term.
There are many individuals that struggle with depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are symptoms. They're not a cause, they're an effect.
From the viewpoint of psychiatry and neuroscience, depression is caused by a decrease of certain neurotransmitters. And there is a balance between all of them. So when one decreases, there is also a rising up of others. But what I came to understand is that the physiological mechanisms which are affected, but we cannot claim those changes as a cause. Let's put it this way: cause have causes, because something must have happened before that decrease in serotonin.
The foundation of the issue is the thinking of the individual and the thinking based upon error rather than being based upon truth. And if you can help an individual to see the truth instead of the error, then that can change what's going on in the mind. It can affect the neurochemicals that are being produced in the brain. It can affect the brain structure, and then it can help an individual to have freedom from those things. There are many different pathways that you can get to depression and anxiety. The driving factor behind depression, well, there can be fear, but there can be guilt, there can be anger, there can be a number of different pathways in regards to depression. Anxiety, it's a fear pathway.
Fear and panic, anxiety comes because I want to control something that I cannot control at any time because of trying the impossible. If I would never try the impossible, I would never have fear. By example, my life. Life is never under our control because we have not given it to us. It's not ours. God gave it to me. He will keep it as long as He wants to keep it. I can only live it, but I want to live it joyfully and not in fear of losing it. Now I want by all means to avoid to die, and by this I enter into a conflict in myself, trying to solve something that I cannot solve.
You can look around yourself and you will see that almost everything that surrounds you can harm you and you cannot control. So if I can trust in Him that every circumstance of my life is under His control, then I will have no fear.
One thing that people need to recognize is that it's not feelings that guide thoughts. It's thoughts that direct feelings. So thoughts come first, feelings come after. Unless you come into contact with certain chemicals from outside, like injecting a chemical, eating chemicals, absorbing chemicals, because feelings are the effect of chemicals. Thoughts are associated with the electrical activity of the brain, and so it's the electrical activity that then leads to the generation of the chemicals that then causes the feelings. And so if you haven't entered into depression because you were using some other substance, then it's going to be the thoughts that has created the depression. And then the solution is not changing the chemicals, the solution is changing the thoughts, and then the changing of the thoughts will change the chemicals.
You start looking for solutions, and the less solutions you find, the more you start looking for things to be dependent on. So you could see that with medication. So when my depression was getting bad, I went on to antidepressants because I was so low and my energy was low.
Now, when it comes to antidepressants and other medications of that nature, what they do is they help in a way to change the chemicals in the brain, to change how an individual feels. And since so many people are used to thinking how they feel, then when they don't feel so bad, they don't think so bad. But when you take them off the medication, they start to feel worse, and then they begin to think worse, and now you got to put them back on the medication. But if you can take an individual and you can teach them how to think, and by the grace of God, connect them with God, who is the source of good thinking, And now they can take over or borrow over God's thoughts and think His thoughts, regardless of how they feel. Then when you take them off the medication, though they might feel worse for a while, they can continue to think well, and then they don't have to go back on the medication later. So that's something for people to recognize too. Sometimes people use medications. Okay, teach them how to think while they're on the medications. Then you can look at taking them off the medications while they can still think well, regardless of how they feel.
So you grab onto the antidepressants, and if those aren't working, then you still got your cigarettes, and if those aren't working, you turn into alcohol. So it's not a difficult thing to become an alcoholic. And 4 or 5 years ago, I was an alcoholic. And before that, through the grace of God, He started working in my life. He's always been there, but God actually knows when you're ready and when He starts working in your life. And when you think it's things that are going wrong, it is God actually working to bring you out of the darkness. I quit smoking and I hung on to drinking for a bit longer. But then when I went on my depression and anxiety recovery program too, I'd weaned myself off of my antidepressants, but then they proceeded to put me onto a whole lot of health supplements to improve this in my body, improve that in my body. And I found that really difficult because I don't want to be, and I don't think God created us to be dependent on things that are man-made. I do think there might be a place then for 1 or 2 supplements here and there, but to be spending $600 a month on supplements, to me, is just replacing one problem for another problem. One tablet and medication, putting it into another. So it's easy if you're not in a controlled environment, which all of these antidepressant, anxiety programs are. They run in a controlled environment. So it's easy for a person to flourish in that environment because it's all controlled. But then when you got to go back to reality, and the problem that you got with the anxiety and depression is that, and cognitive behavioral therapy, is that they rely on the item that is broken to fix itself. So while I'm broken and they're giving me the tools to fix myself, I'm incapable of fixing myself. It's only through knowing who I am in God and changing my perspective on my life and how I fit into life and how I fit in with God's plan that I've actually overcome my depression and my anxiety, not through a controlled environment. So as helpful as all of those tools are, and they all have their place, and God allows those things to happen on every step of your journey, because as you're going over there, He's leading you out of darkness. So every situation is bringing you one step closer to the light.
Now, who determines how I process an information? That was my most important search. I came to the conclusion that there is the perception of oneself. That is, who am I? Identity is the factor by which everything is evaluated. And there are only 2 identities possible. We either are a channel, a creature, like everything else, or we are a God, or not a channel, but a wellspring that comes out of us things.
After you go through and you find the truth, and you know who you are in God, and you know who your God is, it opens up a whole new world. It brings so much, it just brings so much freedom. And the condemnation is gone, where you're not condemning and you're not holding on, you're not begrudging your parents that, they were mean and then they did this, to finally know that they were also operating from error and that they had no choice in to do what they do to you. And yet God allowed it, and He allowed it for my benefit.
So I came to understand that the human being believes he's born like this, because I saw it in every human being, that he is a God, that he perceives all things from this perspective. And by perceiving this from this perspective, evidently, he must take all things personally. Now, if he takes the positive personally, that's fine. He won't need to protest against it because it's, oh, I'm loved, it's all good. But if he perceives the negative personally against himself, he must be his own enemy and destroy himself, putting the wrong input into his brain.
Thought of loss. It is not any loss that will bring me in depression. It is the thought of losing something that is mine, something that is personal, that belongs to me. That idea will bring me into depression.
Extreme example, when a child dies to a mother or to a father, that's a great loss. Now, through the perspective of I'm a God, it's my loss, because it's my child, I made it, it has to be there for me. It's totally unconscious to the parents. And they enter into deep depression, or even 1 year later they get cancer or heart attack. If he would have the right perspective, I'm a child of God, he would know my child is also a child of God. It's not my possession. I didn't make him. He's not there for me. I am there for him. So then he could process it as, yes, it's a sad element, it's a great loss, but it's God's loss, not my loss. Yes, disease comes suddenly, but without the thought of personal loss, it will never come.
So when I think about my depression and the cause of it, I think there's many elements that do affect it, but I think the core element is I can put it down to the way I think. My problems aren't out there from other people or what they're doing or not doing. The problem is the way I perceive things. The problem is the way the perspective that I put on different situations and different problems. When you're trying to act God in your own life and trying to create this life that you envisage and trying to control everybody in it, you're making yourself God over your own life. But the minute you realize that you're a creature, you can come to perspective where you can try something, and if it doesn't work out, you just let it go. So when your wife does something out of the ordinary or has characteristics that aren't suitable for the way you envisage your children to be bring up, those are things out of your control. If a spouse goes and cheats on you, when you're bringing up children, you do the best as you can with the knowledge you got. The knowledge you got is only what you got from your parents and your own experiences and what you've seen, so you think that's the norm. But when the child starts behaving differently, those are situations that test you because they're out of your control. When you run your business and you show up every day and you're working 18 hours a day, you do your job and your customer doesn't pay you, that's out of your control. My purpose was to have a big business and make money and to protect and take care of my family financially, send my children to the best schools possible. But as I've gone through life and I've seen a vanity of a lot of the things, to what end? You build all this stuff, you give up your life, time that you could be spending with loved ones, you give up time that you could be helping the poor, you give up time, so everything comes with a cost. And being in business came at a big cost personally, because at one stage my business was so big I was spending 1 week a month at home. I was traveling 3 weeks of a month, and that's time away from family and time away from your children. So from that point a lot of things changed. I got remarried about 12 years ago, and I had 3 sons from my first marriage. I've had my fourth child, and she's turning 9 in July, and she's a little girl. So when I moved to New Zealand, I still had this mindset of wanting to build a big business, but all the time in the bottom of my heart knowing that I should be doing God's work. And over the last few years, I've tried to change that, where I can put God first in everything, foremost in my thinking and in my processing and in my commitment. What He's showing me now is that my purpose as a child of God is to actually take from Him and pass on everything that I take from Him onto others. So because He is love, I can take love from Him and be a channel of love to other people. So I can love my wife, I can love my daughter, I can love my sons, I can love people around me without any expectation. Because when you're trying to love from yourself, which is impossible, you have an expectation that they owe you something and that you want love in return. And when you're taking from God and you're giving without expectation, it is pure and it is sincere and it is liberating, because you're giving that person the freedom to be who they want to be. The major improvements that I've had is that I no longer get headaches every day. I've had, from having headaches 5 to 7 days a week, I've had 4 headaches in the last year. And if I do get a headache, it's often linked to stressful thinking, where I'm actually trying to control something or have a dependency on something, or something like if I haven't had any water to drink.
This connection between the mind and the body is very intimate, right? It's very intimate. When one is affected, the other sympathizes. Now, an interesting thing about the mind versus the body is that the mind can be deceived but thinks it's right. So you can be in a state of deception and completely think you're okay. But the body is simply made up of chemicals. It's made up of molecules. Molecules or chemicals don't have the capacity to be deceived. The body must tell the truth of what's put into it. And how is the body going to show error? It's going to show error by dysfunction. And how is the mind going to show truth? It's going to show truth by function. Because truth is information that puts things in the right order so that it works. And error is information that puts things in the wrong order so that it doesn't work.
I don't have indigestion anymore, because the indigestion was linked to my holding my breath. So my stomach wasn't working properly because it was always tense, so it wasn't digesting my food properly. My depression, from the way all through my life, I've never been a happy person. I've always would rather be dead than alive. I always would rather choose death over life. That's why when certain things happened 4 years ago, I didn't worry about it, because to me death was a better option.
Solomon evidently understood something about that we today don't understand. A merry heart is good like a medicine. He does not speak about the pump that is in our chest. He speaks about the spiritual thing, because he speaks about words. So remember these words so that you don't forget them. Keep them in the midst of the heart, because they are life to you and they are health to your whole body. And the broken spirit drieth up the bones. So in one sentence with 2 ideas, he puts the whole human health together. Because everything we can be, we either are satisfied and happy, that's a merry heart, or we are unsatisfied and sad. He could just see it very well, and I could prove this in all these 21 years, that he was perfectly right. Because disease comes from an unsatisfied spirit.
I always had this concept of, why must these things happen to me? Why must any luck I have be bad luck? Why can't things just work out? Why can't things be better? Everything that I've achieved, I felt it was through my own ability, and it was through really hard work, and that I deserve better. But when I look back now, I am so grateful for all the hardships I've had, I'm grateful for all the problems I've had. I'm grateful for all the illnesses I've had or the symptoms I've had. Every single thing that I've had to go through, it has shaped my thinking, it has changed my thinking, it has led me to ask more questions, more pertinent questions about life, about the meaning of life. Why are we here? What are we doing here? How long are we here for? And I look at those losses, they were actually gains, because it was through those losses that my perspective started changing. It was through those losses that my thinking started changing. So in God's providence, He is so good. He's so wise. So I don't question those kind of things anymore. And the freedom that I now have is that when something starts going wrong, I no longer fear it. I know that if that thing that I got to get over is going to be allowed by God, it's going to be good for me. And He's going to use it to teach me something that's fundamentally needed in me.
It's so amazing in the whole world. And we do not emphasize in health the right way of thinking. And I'm very glad that I could understand, by God's help, what is that thought that destroys the body and what is that thought that makes him function. What is that thought that makes us happy and what is that thought that makes us sad. People only live in the past because they lost something there. If you never lose anything in the past, you're not living the past. You forget every gain. You only don't forget everything that you lost, because this is how we were created. We must go for the gain and we must avoid loss.
So I'd like to encourage anybody that's out there that is having marital problems, that is having business failures, that is moving countries, that is going through a divorce, having problems with their kids, with drugs or whatever. I would encourage them to look to Jesus, and I would not fret or fear, because we don't know what God needs to put our children through or another man through in order to save them. And there is no greater prize than salvation. There is no greater winning thing than to actually enter into the kingdom of God. So it would be to look to God and do not fret or fear, because you will get through whatever you're going through.